He's Chris Fowler back here on the show. How are you, Chris?
Oh, fantastic, Rich. I still had a natural high. I took a red eye after the Rose Bowl. I was still high on Tuesday from the experience, just being there and being a part of it and witnessing one of the great games that's ever been played in that stadium and one of the great postseason games I've ever seen.
And I'd love to just give you the floor on this one before we move on to the national championship game, because I have my 2 cents on why. But what makes that building so special? I mean, what makes that place just an incredible theater for college football, Chris?
Everything about it. The backdrop, the mountains, which late in the day you get that golden haze, and it looks like an oil painting that's out behind the stadium, but it's very real, and just the quality of the light and the sense of history in the building. I think that the Rose Bowl tends to elevate anything that happens on that field. So an average game can become a good game, and a great game like that can become an epic part of the history of the sport. And it's hard to explain any better than that. I've tried over the years, but I think you just have to experience it as you did with your family. And you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Even a regular UCLA game is pretty special there. But when you get a Rose Bowl game that's a playoff game that goes down to the last seconds and beyond, I think of some of my favorite memories, whether it's Texas USC in the Rose Bowl, things like that just jump out. But the Rose Bowl is sort of a bowl game that will always endure regardless of the playoff format, and will always sort of stand alone and have its own chapter in history.
Okay, so what do you think what we saw out of Georgia in that game, can they take into a completely different opponent, obviously, in Oklahoma, and show their stuff on that stage similar to what we saw in Pasadena, Chris?
Yeah, totally different kind of game. Obviously, stylistically, much, much harder to move the ball against Alabama. I think they would hope to have a lot better defensive game than they had, because Mayfield had them mesmerized in the first half before they kind of adjusted. I think that what you take away is that the freshman quarterback, Jake Fromm, is just out of this world. I mean, I don't know how you have that kind of poise and composure and decision-making command at that age, at that level. I don't know how you do that. He's an interesting guy. I asked him before the game, I said, what's the last time in your life you felt uncomfortable in a situation?
What do you say?
He couldn't think of one. He was completely stumped. Imagine, I'm uncomfortable 3 times a day.
It's incredible.
And maybe he doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. There's the blissful ignorance of being 19 years old and really knowing nothing but athletic success. He's the kid that took his team to the Little League World Series and hit 3 homers and struck out 11. And he was just that kid always, and I think has had athletic success at every level and been that alpha kind of guy. Now, as you know, football will humble you. You will be humbled no matter how great you are. If you're a player or a coach, you'll have that moment of reckoning. Georgia fans, just hoping that doesn't happen on Monday night. Even in their one loss, I don't think that Fromm felt like he played badly or was a deer in headlights. I think that he's one of those guys that really hasn't experienced failure in the big moment yet. And we'll find out if he can put together another performance. It's going to take a total team thing to beat Alabama. It's not just about the quarterback. But I think that without him, you don't have a chance.
Chris,
so that's why you bring him up first.
Chris Fowler is calling the national championship game on Monday, joining us here on the Friday show. It's kind of maybe unfair to lump them all together, but nobody who has coached with and for Nick Saban has ever beaten Nick Saban in a game where they face each other as head coaches. Why do you think that is, Chris?
It never come close. Kirby Smart was asking about what are Saban's tendencies that make him tough to beat. He has a tendency to recruit really good players. That's what he said. I think that his assistants haven't beaten Saban very often because they haven't had the better team. Now, this might be the biggest test of that. Jimbo Fisher, a former Saban assistant, began this season right in the same building where they'll finish it. And Florida State was no match for Alabama, really, especially after the quarterback got knocked out. I think Kirby is building a program at Georgia that's going to closely mirror the way Saban built Alabama. I'm not saying they're going to have that many trophies in their case before he's done, but I think that he's patterned everything after him. Was with him for 4 championships at Alabama. I talked to Krzyzewski about this very question the other day because Mike Bray is the only former Coach K assistant that's really been able to beat him. And he stopped scheduling Mike Bray after he won about 5 games against him. But he didn't really have a good answer. I think that he he doesn't think it has a lot to do with the mindset of the coach. It has a lot to do with the toughness of Alabama, and the average margin of 28 points is pretty imposing. That's a lot of history that Kirby's trying to overcome.
So I had our friend Bruce Feldman in studio the day after the Rose Bowl. Asked him about this matchup, and he mentioned, just Alabama, because how many times have you ever seen Alabama lose in a street fight, is what he said. So who's the guy on Georgia that could make this more than just a street fight, that could make the matchup problem significant for Alabama? Is it Michelle? Is it somebody else we're not thinking of? Who do you think it is, Chris?
That's a good point about the street fight. I mean, they came pissed off, and Alabama is the favorite in every game they play, but they convinced themselves they were underdogs against Clemson. They lost last year. They were the lower seed, which means nothing to Vegas. Alabama is the favorite in this game. I've talked to their players. They feel like underdogs again going into a hostile house. So that does not bode well. If they bring that same chip and that same pissed-off attitude, and they're still fresh a week later, because I think a big part of their win over Clemson was those guys hadn't played in a while. They took the loss to Auburn, missed out in the SEC championship game, had a long time to get healthy and freshen up. But they suffered a couple more injuries in that game. So we'll see if they can turn it around in a week. Georgia has to be a little bit on fumes. They say they're okay, but we've never had a team in a championship game, in the 4-year history of this, or any time before it, have to turn around and play the ultimate game so soon after going to the wire. I mean, the semifinals are typically routes. So the teams that come into them, championship game, haven't spent all their fuel. And Georgia players, they were pretty exhausted mentally and physically. So let's see if they can regroup. You got Roquan Smith over there, the Butkus winner, the middle linebacker, who played a poor first half and then rose up, and he made it a street fight on defense for Georgia. They played much better against Mayfield after halftime. So he's the guy you look to. But Georgia's going to have to do more than street fight him. I think you got to throw the ball downfield. You have to create some of those chunk plays. You have to throw the back shoulder fades to Javon Wims, who's Fromm's favorite receiver. You have to attack them vertically, because you simply can't let them line up, press you, crowd the box, and make it one of those street fights, 5 yards in line of scrimmage. You've got to stretch them downfield the way Deshaun Watson has done, and a couple other teams that have beaten Alabama. That's been the common thread, is they've been able to do that.
And so now that we are finally in the national championship game, Chris, I'm going to go here with you one more time. Seeing Scott Frost and UCF knock off Auburn, seeing Wisconsin do what it did to the turnover chain, right? I mean, 8 teams. Shouldn't we be seeing an 8 team? Wouldn't this have been great for you? I mean, not personally, obviously, to have been working on Christmas weekend for a national quarterfinal weekend. How incredible would that be, Chris?
Well, would you have gotten 4 different teams in the semis than you had? I mean, listen, we could talk about an 8-team playoff. I'm not totally against it. I think you'd have to do some things to modify the present system to get there. I would eliminate the conference championship games from that. I don't think you can simply keep adding games on. Mm-hmm. The wear and tear is very real. But if you eliminate those games, we talked about that before, I think you can make it doable. I think you maybe have to play, though, that quarterfinal tier at home. Who among those 4 semifinal teams in the bracket, who would have lost a home game? I mean, I love UCF's story. I think it's fantastic. Wisconsin, great season. But let's say you did put Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma, Alabama at home in quarterfinals. We'll never know. I mean, it's just speculation, but I don't know. You probably, if the chalk held, you would have had the same 4 teams make the semis this year. So,
well, I would have put Ohio State at home. If we're going to
put them seed,
yeah, I mean, because they won their conference, and if you want Alabama to get in, they'd have to go on the road to play a game. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, Ohio State's argument is weaker because they didn't win their division last year. So, I mean, I think that it's a fluid argument depending on what team you pull for. I think. I mean, Ohio State fans still don't believe Alabama belongs. I said, well, they belong if you're picking the best 4. If that's all they're supposed to do is pick the best 4, how in the world can you tell me Alabama's not one of the best 4? I mean, they just dominated the top seed. Now, I'm not saying Ohio State doesn't have a beef. They do, but listen, I mean, they benefited from the philosophy a year ago that cost them this year. So I don't know. I'm not sure you can really stand on that argument too long. You could argue about resumes, whatever. Maybe Alabama gets the benefit of the doubt, and maybe that's viewed as unfair by a lot of fans. But is that not one of the 4 best teams? I mean, they look like it to me.
All right,
4-point favorite in Georgia. So
last one for you, Chris Fowler. I've known you for a long time. Those who follow you on Twitter at CB Fowler see the breadcrumbs that you are a Broncos fan. Okay, you're sitting there 5th overall, Chris Fowler. You have seen Baker Mayfield play a ton of games. Would you want John Elway to pull the trigger on Baker Mayfield and stick him in Mile High for his professional football career and play for the Broncos? What do you think?
As a Denver fan, I'd like it. As a guy who likes Mayfield, do you really want to put him in that situation? I mean, there's so many holes on those teams that draft near the top. I think any quarterback that's put in there is just like, are you set up to succeed? I like Baker a lot. I don't know. I'm not a professional evaluator of NFL talent, so I wouldn't even. But I think a lot of NFL teams like him. I think he's going to have no trouble getting drafted high.
You know him personally, too, though. I mean, in the whole point of him being able to be triggered by Kansas would be something that's a little bit concerning when you take him to the next level. Are you concerned about that sort of thing?
Not what would happen on the field. No, I think he plays better. I think that the concern people would have, and this probably is a little bit unfair, but it's more about his arrest in the offseason than what he did against Kansas. You just got to make sure that the face of the franchise isn't going to go to a bar and get drunk and get in a scuffle. I mean, that's what I think the bigger concern would be. And, he's been given a second chance on that, but I'm sure teams will question him about it. I certainly believe in the guy. I think he's got all the qualities. I've seen all these quarterbacks. It's really, really tough for me to project the next level and say, hey, Josh Rosen is a can't-miss superstar, or Darnold is, or Josh Allen is. Or I'll tell you what, I would take Baker's career and his intangibles over a lot of those guys. But, he's certainly not a prototype. I mean, who's the last guy, he's sort of his physical stature quarterback who was taken that high?
Nope.
I mean, certain guys have succeeded in a huge way. Russell Wilson, Breeze, others, of course, but they weren't top 5 picks.
True. Chris, have a great weekend, and I will be looking forward to sitting down with my family and turning you and the rest of the crew on Monday night on ESPN at 8 Eastern Time. And
I'll be watching on the weekend, and then we'll just settle in and have fun on Monday night.
Fantastic. I look forward to it. That's Chris Fowler getting set to call yet another big, huge, memorable college football game.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.